My name is Becky Hewlett. I am from the Department of Nursing and Health Sciences. I'm originally from Kansas. I was an RN for 17 years in a hospital setting, mostly in was a director in a hospital. I ran the transplant program, had a 26-bed inpatient transplant nephrology unit, and then I was also in charge of inpatient, outpatient, and contract services dialysis for the 512-bed facility that I worked in. So that was what I did before. Then I moved to academics. I have been in academics for 9 years, and that includes the last 5 here at Elmhurst University. I'm still trying to get used to calling us university. All right, so I'm a big Brene Brown fan. So in spirit of vulnerability, I have to say that prior to CST 500, which I took this past summer, I had no formal training in pedagogy. I had 2 really great mentors, but that actually still mentor me and are friends of mine today, but that was the extent of my official training. All right, so here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to describe resilient pedagogy, but I'm going to do that from my lens. Then I'm going to show you some strategies that I have employed in my administrative graduate level specialty course that was this fall that I taught in the first half of the fall semester. And then I'm going to give you my top 10 tips and tricks so you can hopefully integrate those into your courses. All right, so what is resilient pedagogy to me? So there's lots of formal definitions. The links on the right-hand side of this slide are some of those more formal definitions, but I wanted to tell you what it meant to me personally. So I love to read as a kid, as many of us do, and I see some of you are book club people with me, but I love to read. I still love to read. Every time we'd get in the car when I was a kid, I would have my nose in a book, so I continue to love to read. I loved all of the resources that we got in CST 500, but what I realized about, elementary, middle school age is that I had a comprehension problem. I would have to read everything 2 or 3 times. It was really difficult for me. You guys all remember word problems in math, right? They were my kryptonite. It was horrible. Absolutely hated it. Comprehension and math. Oh, terrible. But what I realized, though, when I was in my graduate education was that it takes multiple ways of engaging me and multiple different ways of connecting my learning to the content in order for me to take it in a lot easier than I had when I was younger. So when I enrolled in CST 500, I was introduced to different aspects of teaching and learning that made a lot of light bulbs go off for me. Some I was doing without really knowing what I was doing, but other strategies I really learned and have been able to employ. So resilient teaching for me became about creating more intentional connections using multiple means and increasing engagement of not just students, but also myself as the instructors. In nursing, I've heard a lot of times, I'm going to teach when I retire. Well, I don't want to work that hard in retirement, okay? We all know teaching is hard work, and some people think it's really easy. The teaching that I did before I came to Elmhurst was online. I felt huge responsibilities to be available 24/7. When was I going to sleep? I have 2 kids, and they were little then. So when was I going to find time for work, life, and everything else? Well, I really believed that the students thought that when I gave them a deadline for their papers to be turned in at midnight, that I should be at midnight 01 on the computer grading those papers. So I had all these obligations, feeling of obligations, and that really affected me personally, work-life harmonizing. And so I wanted CST 500 to help me adjust my own faculty attitude and practices with students in order for all of us to be more resilient, my courses, myself, and my students as well. Okay, so the first strategy that I employed was color coding. I thought that this was really elementary at first, but when I employed it, it was like magic. It was just totally magic. So the words on the slide don't matter, but I just color coded every module, and it totally changed the way the students could look into the course, could find things in the course, and it really made course navigation easier. The second strategy was chunking. I had already done this, but not to the extent that I did following CST 500. So this is a sample piece of my calendar or my content outline. So I have the week and the date, the actual module name, and all of the sub chunks underneath of that, all the topics we're going to talk about. In the big middle column, I give them everything that they're supposed to do in preparation for class. And then on the far right hand, I give them all the activities we're going to do in class and assignments as well. So I really broke that down in even greater detail than I already had. Something I wasn't doing before. I wasn't putting all the in-class activities on there. And sometimes students weren't prepared in the way they should have been. So the third strategy, and Karen and I talked about this one a lot. The 535, the Nursing Administration Specialty course that I focused on for CST 500, is a 4-semester hour graduate level course. So in other words, heavy content, lots of assignments. 3 of those assignments were online discussion boards. Now, we all know that online discussion boards can be rather flat, or at least they were for me. And so I'm shifted all of those to not graded assignments that we did during class. And so in the wonderful Zoom world, how I monitored that was I'd lecture for a little bit in class. Okay, so this is a 4-hour-long class, so it takes a lot of attention. It's hard to keep them engaged. So I would lecture for a little while. Then we would do in-class activities. And then how we did these online discussions were I told them, all right, take a 5-minute break, shut your cameras off, mute your microphones, and read your resource article, or read your article. And then their notification to me that they were done reading was to turn their camera back on. So it gave them a little bit of a break, but it was also a great nonverbal cue that, when their cameras came back on, we were all ready to continue the conversation. And then I had prearranged discussion questions, but we did all of those in class, in live class, and it really, there was no preparation required by the students in advance. We just did it all in class. The time that they read the articles, I was intentional about the length of the article. It was less than 10 pages. So we weren't, having 45-minute time away from the class time. So the next strategy was I changed my Blackboard menu. None of you have had class with me before, so I will tell you what's on the left-hand side, I did for every single class. It didn't matter what kind of class it was, I did the same menu. I did that for consistency because all of us instructors do that differently. In the traditional master's program, traditional MSN program, I had a lot of the students most of their second year. And so I felt like that consistency for them was really important. On the left is how I did it in the old version of me. So after CST 500, I struggled. Karen, God love you, she divided everything in modules. And I struggled with that because I was so used to how I did things. However, I did not make this change for the fall for my administrative specialty class, but I did make it for another class that I taught in the last half of the fall semester. And it was the first year MSN students, and it was research and evidence-based practice. And I told them up front, I said, all right, I'm trying this new. What do you guys think? Give me some feedback. And they gave me feedback, and it actually turned out really great. So what is on the right-hand side is now how I'm going to set up all of my classes moving forward. Strategy 5 is audio feedback. I don't know anybody that likes to hear themselves being recorded. So I tried to be very articulate the first time, but I did this as a pilot in the fall. And I am a teacher that gives a lot of written feedback. I take a lot of notes, I give a lot of feedback. That's important to me. I want the students to be able to do better on the next assignment than they did. So I tried this pilot, and you have to be willing to take feedback, right? I piloted this with a couple students that I knew would not sugarcoat anything and that I found to be rather challenging students. They actually did have some constructive feedback for me, but they actually liked the more personal nature of being able to hear my voice versus reading my written word. Okay, so the 6th strategy was probably the toughest strategy that I employed. And I had been doing this prior to CST 500. However, Karen and I had talked about problem solving this because how you present assignments without structure is very important in how you talk to the students about how to do that. Even at the graduate level, students want you to spoon feed them. Hey, show me another paper. Show me somebody else's work. Tell me how to format this. Well, I have assignments where, you know what, honestly, I could care less about the format. I want to know that you grasp the content. That is what's most important to me. So I would give instructions. Here's the course objectives that were going to be measured. Here's the instructions for the assignment. And then it's up to you to give it to me in whatever format you would like. Maybe that's a YouTube video. Maybe that is a PowerPoint. Maybe it's a voiceover PowerPoint. Maybe it's an APA paper. But having it and presenting it to the students in a very unstructured manner can be difficult and was challenging. But I have really changed the words and the way I present that to the students to make it seem like I'm more concerned with the content. And that's really where I try to keep my comments to the students and give very little point allotment in their rubric to the actual format of their assignment. And then the last strategy that I did was to connect last week with this week. So in the traditional MSM program, classes are one evening a week. And I am really good about having an agenda every week, but I wasn't really good about pulling a thread through every week to connect everything. So at the beginning of every lecture, I always started with a very brief 5-minute or less review of what we did last week. Then I would present the content for this week, but then at the very end of my presentations, I would always let them have a preview for the following week. So I really tried to pull those threads through. So my top 10 tricks. So perspective. I try to always keep perspective, the teacher perspective, obviously, but also the perspective of my students. I want to try to look at the content of the course, the arrangement, the organization of the course, my instructions, through the eyes of my students. And sometimes I would even ask my friends outside of the teaching world to read instructions for my assignments so I could make sure that I have it broken down well enough. Transparency. Please tell me what I'm going to get into from the beginning. I want to see it. I open my courses, everything in my entire course, I open from the very beginning. I was very transparent about what is hard in this class and what is easy in this class. So make some things easy. You guys didn't realize maybe what I did. I'm sure probably Karen and Nick and those of us have taken CST 500. On that slide where I talked about resilient pedagogy, on the right, when I gave you those links, I named them something specific. I told you if they're an article or a video, and I put the length of time that the video is. I'm trying to make it really easy for my students to understand what they're going to get into. You know, how many times have you taken an online class or you click into something and the video is an hour long and I only have 10 minutes, you know? So try to make things easy, put things out in front of them. Preparation. Oh man, this is like the killer, right? Give yourself twice as much time as you think in order to prepare your course, to get it ready to go. It always takes me, I am very OCD. I like things a certain way. I always have to give myself many, many hours of time to redo every single course. Even if I've taught it for years, it doesn't matter. I still have to give myself a lot of prep time. Try one thing, make it really short and sweet. Just like the one course that I changed my Blackboard menu. It was the only thing I changed for that course. So you take these small wins and you build them into really big wins, and you can build your confidence by doing just small steps at a time. Okay, so intentional connections. Talk and talk again, not just about the content, but about why the content is important beyond their degree, beyond the grade that they're going to earn. Connect it back to their work. I try to be mindful in planning how to make those multiple connections because I know I need them, but also connections to what? Student to the content, student to student, but also student to me as the instructor. Asking for feedback. This is really important. I try to be very vulnerable with my students, not just about new things that I'm trying in class, and I ask for real-time feedback, but I also say, and if you are not comfortable giving me that feedback, you're gonna have a survey. Please put it in there. Or you can email me outside of class, whatever you are comfortable with, but you do have to be willing to receive that and take that in. Know your role. I thought I was the teacher, but in order to facilitate those connections, you really have to have managerial role, you have a social role, pedagogical role, and technological at this point. So know your roles and fill all of them in order to facilitate those connections. Less is always more. I gave you guys the example of me moving those 3 online discussion boards to in real time, in real person, person-to-person communication, which was great. I'm kind of a tough teacher. I kind of have that reputation, but it's true. Sometimes less is more. And actually the student feedback that I'm getting about these changes that I've employed have said they're able to focus more on the content and dig deeper with the content than they are worrying about. They're not too busy worried about the number of assignments that are in the course. And then the last thing on my list is to think with the end in mind. This is something that is near and dear to my heart because Dr. Mary Esterly, who retired last year, always said this to me. And I continue to say it to the students, but it now has a different additional meaning to me now after completing CST 500. So what do we want our students to look like in the end? What's the end game for them? Decide what that student looks like, decide what content you want them to have when they leave the class. Obviously, they're not going to take everything with them, but what's most important? And then work backwards from there. So you make those connections intentional, use multiple ways of making those connections, engage your students, and getting back to that first slide, harmonizing my own faculty attitude and practices. So I think what I feel I want to end the course with, in addition to what I want my students to. And I always have to end with quotes. So I thought this one was one that meant a lot to me when I was in the clinical world in transplant, but I think it's totally applicable to us in education. And I wanted to share that with you. And finally, that is it. I didn't time myself, so I'm sorry if I went over, but I wanted to say thank you to Karen and Nick for the wonderful CST experience that I had. And thank you to Dean for giving us that experience of that opportunity.
Thank you so much, Becky. Questions for Becky? I can start us off with a question for Becky. Becky, I'm curious, as I've been playing with the different technological platforms to try and enhance teaching and learning, I'm curious what constructive feedback your students gave you on the audio feedback option.
Okay, so one person, well, I piloted with 2 people. One person was like, oh my gosh, I love it. I love hearing your voice. It's one thing to read what you write, but it's a whole nother thing to hear the tone of your voice. Because sometimes if it's really good, I get really excited and I want them to hear that. But the other person, she was generally positive. The negative was, it's kind of hard to find. And she had to click into it and she couldn't just scroll the mouse to see all my embedded comments. So, is that really truly constructive? I don't know, but hey, it's a different perspective. It was her perspective. So I appreciated that.
Thank you so much, Becky. Other questions for Becky? I would ask that you unmute your mic and ask the question. I can only see one panel at a time, so I can't always see the hands.
Can I go, Nick?
Absolutely.
Becky, I just wanted to share in your appreciation for the chunking and the moduling. I went back to a course I taught last fall to look for some things, and it was just like a dumpster full of pile of stuff compared to what we learned in CST 500. So yeah, just a second on that.
Yeah, totally. And I used to have the assignments in one place, the content in another, and the resources in another, and it was just craziness. So it was so much easier. So thank you, Karen, for having that, forcing us and motivating us to look at things a little bit differently.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Becky, for sharing that with us. We would think of some questions down the line for not just Becky, but for each one of our presenters. In the wrap up, I'll give everyone an opportunity to ask some additional questions at that point as well. So we'll transition to Colleen then.